I've said it, and it sounds cliche, but it's just kind of the culmination of spring for us. I just wanted to see some guys have a chance to play in front of the fans. What an awesome fan base we have for that many people to show up early in the spring like this and watch, and the environment. It's great being back around them, and I just want to get off the field healthy, and I think we did that too. So we've seen 14 practices, guys doing what they need to do, and the schemes that we're running today was just kind of about showcasing some of that to the fans and finishing spring ball the right way.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast with Dave, Honky, Boomer, and Redcast Rob.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast. I'm your host, Honky, and I'm with Redcast Rob.
Hey, everybody. I put this out on Twitter earlier, but I just wanted you to know that after this weekend and attending the spring game, getting such a wonderful tour from Tyler Kai, the associate AD, and spending some time with some former players over at an after party from the spring game, I am agreeing to fully commit to the Husker program beginning this fall. I'm super excited. And I'm sure that our guest tonight has all of my high school stats from 1988 through 1992 on him right now.
I'm guessing that's not the case, Rob, and I don't think the Huskers are offering. But you are correct on a great weekend we had here, and we have a wonderful guest, and we're going to get to him in a second. Before we do, a couple of our early promos here. One of them is where our guest is from, Hail Varsity. You can go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe, use the promo code REDCAST, and you can get $10 off subscription there. Next, you might have seen something that we've teased here the last couple of days, a fan forum, and you'll see how we spell four with the 4 question marks. We're going to start up a new spinoff with the Redcast that's going to be premiering in the near future. The premise is simple. It's not even really that unique. I or any one of the Redcasters are going to sit down and do one-on-one interviews with a Husker fan, ask them the same 4 questions, and it could be a former player, coach, famous celebrity fan, or just your next door neighbor. So you might be on the Redcast at some point doing a fan forum. And last but not least, Smack and Smooch, great sponsors here of the Redcast. They are making a lot of the shirts and all the shirts and the koozies and everything that we've been wearing here and sporting the last couple of weeks, custom shirts and specialty items. Shane and Laura, give them a call, 308-325-2542. So with that said, our guest here tonight, we welcome for the first time to the Redcast, Greg Smith, recruiting analyst over at Hail Varsity. Greg writes a daily recruiting notebook column and hosts a weekly Hail Varsity podcast on the Hurrdat Media Network called Straight Up Breakdown, where he gives an honest breakdown of what's happening in the world of sports. You can follow Greg on Twitter at GregSmithHV. Welcome to the Redcast.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. And I just have to say off the top, Rob, I'm sure your high school stats were amazing. And I'm sure all of the fans would be very happy to have you as a potential 5-star.
Well, they'd be non-existent, and but the 5-star part is right.
Okay, see, told you.
Well, Greg, like we like to do every week, I'm going to start off with a tweets of the week. And this one, we have a couple to do with the last week. And this one is, I want to first just ask you about this one. This is really cool. Something I saw from Nebraska Business and read the article there. And it just talked about your journey coming into Hail Varsity and doing what you're doing. I just think it's a really neat one. So if you would, just give us a couple, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the kind words. So essentially, it was a really cool honor to have the college that I graduated from, the College of Business, kind of feature me in an alumni feature that they had going, just kind of talking to me about kind of my career and how I ended up in this spot. As I did not go to school. Obviously, if I graduated from the College of Business, I did not go to school for journalism or broadcasting or anything like that. I was a marketing major through college and just kind of found my way into sports just by liking it and kind of talking to people on social media and then getting into blogs and whatnot. And so it's been a weird career and journey to get to this point. I've been doing it for years now, but was not the initial intended path. And I think the purpose of that article was just to show students that you sometimes fall into things that you didn't necessarily go to school for, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine. It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, there was a great quote in it you had where you said, it's important to talk to college prospects about more than football. It can be helpful for them to understand that playing football is just one part of their direction. The academic piece is worth looking into it as well. I mean, that is something we forget sometimes, especially with NIL and all the things going on. These are still student athletes. They're still getting an education. And for the most part, most kids aren't going to go on to do professional sports. So whatever that, the education is so important to all of us, because that's the thing that's going to open the doors, for whatever that we do in our lives and our careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that it gets kids talking about something other than football, right? I think that it's a good way to remember that these are well-rounded kids that have other interests as well. Like, we like to talk about the football part, of course, right? And that's what we're here for. But there are a lot of other things going on as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the football part. And Redcasters watching live here on our Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, especially Facebook and YouTube. Apparently Twitter, you can't send us questions directly through this program that we have. So keep watching if you're watching on Twitter, but on the other two, send in your questions, especially your recruiting questions here, because that's what we're going to get into. And what we just did this last week in spring game, 55,000 people show up. It's funny, only in Nebraska will some people complain what 55,000 means. I mean, come on. When we talked to Tyler Kai last Friday, he was giving us that tour that Rob talked about. And, he's worked at Tennessee and, a big SEC school, 100,000 plus seat stadium. And he was like, it was 20 to 30,000 people would maybe show up at a spring game there. He worked at Tulane. He said it was just pretty much parents showed up. I've seen some spring games at other Big Ten schools. I mean, 55,000. I mean, Greg, put that into perspective, I guess, for the Redcasters listening. What does that look like to a recruit when they walk into that stadium?
Oh, it's a huge deal to recruits, and almost to the point to where they all mention it. And I sometimes wonder, like, did they all get together and talk about this? Like, how does this consistently come up from every recruit? But it really does. And when you talk to kids that especially have been to, like you mentioned, some of those other places around the country and seen kind of what those spring games are like, or even what actual game days are like, and then they come to Nebraska, you'd be amazed at the amount of people that say, man, I went to, school X down south and it wasn't sold out for their actual game. And I went to, Nebraska spring game and they had 55,000 people out there, for a scrimmage. I think it has a really big impact. And I think that sometimes it's easy to take for granted, like the fan support that is here in place at Nebraska, because you just kind of grew up with it, right? Like it was just always like this. But so you take a step back and realize that not only do schools not have, that type of fan support for spring games, it's also in season as well. So I think it's always a big impact to recruits to be able to see that.
Well, some of those recruits here, and I just grabbed these tweets here from last week. There was more than just this, but this was some of the 2023s that were there. And maybe we'll start with that. Let's go just kind of give an overview. I know we're not going to have time to go through every single kid, but Greg, it was a big recruiting weekend for the staff. Was it mainly 2023? Was it 2024 and 25? Was it transfer portal or kind of a combination of all of that?
It was a combination of everything, but I was a little surprised at how focused it was on the 2023 class. It's the current class that we're in, so that sounds weird to say. But typically what ends up happening at these spring games is that you already have a lot of the board set for Nebraska. And so they're bringing in guys for like the second and third time that are in the current class. And then they're really focusing on those future classes to be able to get guys exposure to the Nebraska fan base, and then also to campus and to the city, because as much as people hate to hear it, and I can hear the moans and groans now, kids consistently say, I thought the Nebraska was just cornfields. Or actually Trey, the four-star defensive lineman, Trey Wilson, actually, I did a video with him the other day. He legitimately said, I thought that it was going to be like a couple miles in between houses when I got to Lincoln. Like, it happens. Like, that is just the stereotype of what it's like in Lincoln. So anytime that you can combat that as Nebraska and get these kids on campus, whether it's in the current class or in future classes, so that you can continue to then bring them back, is a good thing. But no, overall it was pretty balanced, maybe even a little bit more leaning towards future classes. But there was a lot of star power in that 2023 group, like you put up on the screen. There were a lot of different 4-stars. I think Nebraska had as many 4-stars visiting this past weekend for the class of 23 than they had the entire season for 2022, like during the regular season. And so it was a really big deal for what they were able able to do. And I think a lot of that is due in part to, one, they needed to reset the board, right? When you have four new assistant coaches that are coming in on the offensive side of the ball, and then you have Bill Busch transitioning into a full-time role, there's going to be a whole lot of new ideas and new prospects that these coaches want to get on campus. And I think that was reflected in kind of where these guys came from as well. As you saw, Georgia represented, Florida, of course, Missouri was also represented. There was a little bit of a shift towards Texas and Illinois as well. There were prospects from all over the country.
As I continue on here, I'm going to look at, let's see here. What was the next one that we had? Well, this is a photo here of O'Shawn, and a photo you took there of him. He was obviously one of the big time recruits that we had there, and he's a transfer portal one. So he is an immediate player, 2022, if we can get him here. And, as you look here, Trev Alberts is talking with him. I mean, they really put on the full court press with him. How important is he to this, and who were some of the real big name ones that were in on the weekend?
Yeah, so O'Shawn is who I probably should have started with in all of this. We get so many questions on this. I put out a call for recruiting questions earlier today, and every single question was about O'Shawn Mathis. And it was reflected in what we saw on Saturday. Like, I'm not sure I've ever seen like so much attention be paid to one recruit, whether it was, the fact that he had his own personal attendant from Nebraska staff out there with him and his family at midfield the whole time during pregame. You saw a number of coaches and players come up to him. You saw the picture with Trev Alberts coming to speak to him. Jason Peter came and talked to him. Like, there was just never a time where he was really alone, and it seemed that he was really enjoying things. You saw the pictures on social media. I know everybody saw Scott Frost in that photo. To my knowledge, that was the first time that Scott Frost has appeared in one of those photos. Like, that never happens. Like, I was kind of stunned, but that also goes to show you just how important he was to the weekend. The other recruit, though, that got almost as much attention was, of course, Dylan Rayola, the 2024 five-star quarterback, who at one point I looked over and someone was handing him a baby to take a picture with. Like, things get weird in recruiting, right? Like, it just kind of goes a little sideways, but it's all fun. He was definitely a big deal. It's always huge to get him on campus, considering he could be the number one overall prospect in the 2024 class. Forget the number one quarterback. He could be the top player in the entire country for that class. So to continue to get him back on Nebraska's campus is a huge deal. We know about the family ties with his uncle Donovan coaching the offensive line now. Dominic, his father, was back in town as well and down there on the field taking in the scene as well. Those were probably the two big ones. But there was another one I want to highlight just because I stood next to him and he was so huge. Beau Hughley, who is a four-star Georgia guy. Yeah, he's a four-star offensive lineman from Georgia. He's actually committed to Georgia right now. And I'm walking down the sideline taking those pictures that you just put up, as I always do every week. And I literally look up and I see this kid, and he's just a mountain. I want to say a man, but he's not. He's like 16 years old. And he's just huge. Like, when you see kids that are like these big time offensive linemen, like, that's exactly what he looked like out of central casting for that. He was on campus. There was a kid that is a 3-star Louisville commit, Adanja Green, who is also from Georgia. He's a Louisville commit right now. He definitely looked the part as well down there. Joshua Manning, the 4-star wide receiver out of Lee Summit, Missouri, was also back on campus for, I believe, the 4th time. He's a really high value target for Nebraska, and Mickey Joseph is working hard to get him. But there were just a number of guys that were here. Kyan Lee, a 4-star defensive back, also from Georgia, surprise, who was a former Georgia commit. He was on campus this weekend as well. Nebraska did a really nice job of getting all these guys here and really getting to show them what the spring game can be as a showcase, to then get them excited to come back either for official visits over the summer or get them back for an actual game day in the fall.
And a number of these guys, you've had video conversations with them. You can find them on YouTube, right, at the Hail Varsity site. You had a great slideshow of all the photos that on the article I read there on hailvarsity.com as well. What a full weekend. And really, it was across the board with the number of players there. It was quarterbacks and linemen and both sides of the ball, and just every position group being affected in one way or the other. Here's what the recruiting class right now currently still sits at. We're at 5 players. And Redcasters, you're familiar with this screen here. And I actually need to update this because I was talking with Greg right beforehand. For 2023, the in-state recruiting, we now have a 6th in-state recruit that was offered. Brock Knudsen from Scottsbluff was at the spring game, and he was offered, correct?
Yes, that is correct. He was offered at the spring game right before he went out to Kansas City for the Under Armour camp. Excuse me. I don't know if you saw, there were some clips floating around on Twitter of him actually pancaking a kid in a drill. So it's good to get the offer from the in-state school and then go out and pancake some kids the next day out in Kansas City.
Well, I love it. And I really appreciate a Scotts Bluff kid. I mean, we obviously Garrett Nelson is from out there, but I love the fact that it really spans the length of the state, that you got to recruit the inner borders of this state as well as any other state in the country. And that means that we're offering kids from Omaha to Scotts Bluff and in between. How about the one big one here, the 4-star that isn't committed yet here, but has the offer, Malachi Coleman? Where was he at this last weekend, and where do you think he's standing?
So I believe he was in Oregon. He was either in Oregon this past weekend or he was just there, but he was not at the spring game.
Okay.
But he was on campus a couple of times during the spring, so it's not as if he hadn't been back to Lincoln here recently. But the latest on his recruitment is it continues to take off. I think over this last month, Oregon, Washington, Iowa, and I believe Texas Tech have all offered him within the last 30 days. He continues to take off, and it's for a couple of different reasons. One, he's a great kid. Like, if you ever get a chance to talk to him, read an interview with him, or see him on video, like, he is just a great kid, first and foremost. And so I think that really attracts colleges to him. But he's also a super player and a great athlete, right? And you can see that by the fact that colleges project him to play so many different positions. Like, Nebraska is recruiting him as a wide receiver. There are some that like him at tight end. There are some that like him at defensive end. Some that like him at outside linebacker. I joke with him that, maybe somebody wants him as a kicker or a punter as well. Might be a waste of his talent. So that vertical wouldn't play as well as a punter. But, he's a multi-talented kid that is really still continuing to take off. And it's been a really neat story because it was really kind of a nice local story here last year, during his junior year, when you started to see him get more offers. Nebraska was one of the first schools, and then Kansas State came in, Minnesota. And then he kind of hit the camp circuit, right? And that's when Georgia kind of jumped in and Oregon jumped in, and you saw some of these other like really big programs come after him. But that's great for him. It's also great exposure for kids here in Lincoln, because when some of those coaches start to show up in the fall, there's a trickle-down effect there, because they get to see teammates, they get to see his opponents as well. So that's great for everybody.
Rob, how are we looking right now on some questions or comments?
Well, the only comments that I have is it's Ken. He's a big fan of the show. First he said, wow, first we got to tailgate with them on Saturday, and now we have Greg Smith on, so we're big time. And then he asked a question, and he wants to know, what percentage would you put Nebraska's chances are at for getting Mathis? So not to talk about Mathis too much here, but apparently that's what our fans want to know. So
I was prepared for that. I feel like that is, I'm telling you, that is the thing that people want to know right now. O'Shawn Mathis, the O'Shawn Mathis watch is on. I would say, if I had to put a percentage on it, and don't hold me to this, I would say 40% right now, and that's probably trending up after this past weekend, because it's just going to be hard to not be impressed by the full court press that Nebraska put on him and his family over the weekend, right? Like, with the amount of attention that they got from Nebraska staff, and I know that they try to demonstrate clearly that there is a need for him, and he plays a position of need. It is something that has eluded Nebraska now for years. You mentioned Garrett Nelson before. He's developed into a really nice player. They could use more guys like that get after the quarterback. The more of those you have, the better. But I will put it at 40, pending some changes, depending on where else he visits. We'll have to see kind of what goes with that. But he did announce earlier today on Twitter that Mathis wants to make an announcement and a decision by the end of this month. I think that'll kind of coincide with TCU's graduation, because that's why he hasn't transferred somewhere already, is he's waiting to graduate from TCU, and then he'll be off to his next school, before, fall camp begins.
I was actually gonna say, yeah, that makes sense, because graduation's end of April, beginning of May for most colleges. So it would make sense that he does that too, just because I'm sure that they're still paying his way over there at TCU. So
right.
Doesn't want to upset too many people. He's still got to go and look people in the eye every day, right? But
right.
I mean,
now did we hear right last week? Did ABM actually, were they sending people down there prior to him even coming down here just to start talking NIL? I mean, how much of a role does NIL start to play obviously in these big time recruits, and how is that changing the game of the recruiting now?
Yeah, so from what I've heard, ABM did have a representative go down to Texas to meet with him to kind of prime him on his options for NIL should he come to Nebraska. That part, to be totally honest, was kind of new information because I don't think many of us realized that these companies could go down and essentially make pitches to guys ahead of time before they even came to campus for visits. So that was really interesting just to see that kind of happen. But it also highlights a bigger point, which is this whole world of NIL is so new and changing and evolving at all times. Like, I don't think many people have a great grasp of what's happening with this. I think that ends up kind of playing to the advantage of schools and players for wanting to get more money, though, because while things are a little bit vague, you can find your ways around things and find ways to get things done. And we'd be naive to think that they weren't, right? Like, it was happening before. It's definitely happening now when it comes to NIL. Now, I do think that it plays a big role, though, and there's a sliding scale, though, depending on the prospect. I think with transfer guys, you're going to see and hear it talked about a lot more, just because those guys are a little bit more seasoned. They've been through the game as far as, college football, and they know what's happening, and they've seen the landscape change, right? And so whereas a high school player is still a lot more unsure about how NIL is going to even be effective for him going into college football, right? But it is definitely part of the pitch. And I would say last year in talking to prospects, it came up some. Now, almost every time I talk to a prospect, NIL comes up. Like, I think that it's a really hot topic right now amongst prospects. And I think that for a positive for Nebraska as well, though, it gets out there. The thing about Casey Thompson saying, you can make six figures as a starter here at Nebraska, you start to hear the whispers about the different deals that he and other players have. Like, that definitely, the word gets out there to these prospects. So that ends up being good marketing for the program as well.
Something else too, and Hunky, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you here.
No, go for it.
Something that Matt and I were discussing with a buddy of ours. We were walking around the stadium before our tour on Friday, and I had brought up that I had read a couple articles on basically schools being able to play players for performance in the academic areas, right? And I had said, well, they had listed, there was about 25 schools or 30 schools or so that had been listed that were paying the players to do that, but Nebraska wasn't one of them. Right. That was on Friday. Today, Parker Gabriel, I think, over at Journal Star, wrote an article talking about the media deal that they had. But then part of his article was also that Nebraska has announced now that they're going to be paying these kids. It's just amounts of I think it's like $5,980 for whatever reason. But then they can also put in other parts, I think, in there where if a player wins an award, like a league award or something like along those lines, that they can, first team All-American or one of those, that they can also incentivize that. So it's a kind of an interesting dynamic that now the schools can be involved with that sort of thing too. And Nebraska is only one of 30 some odd schools that are actually doing that at this point.
Yeah, it's wild. First of all, they announced that right before kickoff of the spring game, and that's why people didn't know. So don't feel bad that you just saw that.
I knew. That's why I was talking about. I said, don't be surprised if they're doing this soon,
yeah,
right?
see, you were clairvoyant on that when you saw it coming. But it was just weird timing that they announced it. And then Trev Alberts did speak about that at halftime up in the press box as well. So he gave some comments on it too, about Nebraska wanting to make sure that they stayed on the forefront of those types of things, which is extremely smart. Like, I would say that is a really smart thing. And I did see the thing about where there was 25, 30 schools that were going to participate in that, because that academic program is voluntary. Like, school, you don't have to do that. But for two things. One, you've got to have the money to be able to do it. And it won't surprise you, though, to find out that I think half of those schools that were initially doing it were in the SEC. So it ends up being a thing where, basically it's kind of the rich get richer and want to continue to find ways to funnel money to the players. Hey, it's in the rules. Go ahead and do it. But I do like the fact that they tried to tie academics into it in some way, shape, or form. I think that it can't be tied directly to GPAs, though, because there's some legality issues there. But they are trying to find different ways. But if you think about it, you mentioned the $5,900 stipend there for that. If you get that and you get another smaller NIL deal and you also already get your scholarship stipend, like you could start to put together a nice little honeypot of money, especially for a college kid that also, in some cases has free housing, depending on if they're staying on campus or not, but then also has the education as well. Like that, you can start to put together a nice package, even for guys that aren't star players, or star level players like a Casey Thompson is.
And you said, it's important to note this, Redcasters, that it's in the rules now. And this is the crazy thing. It sounds, I feel dirty talking about it sometimes, but a couple things. Yeah, because the old school in me comes out and it's like, all this change. But this is nothing new either. I mean, we can go back to SMUs of the 1980s and guys working at car lots and making crazy amounts of money in 1988, right? I mean, the money's always been there. Now it's literally out in front. People know about it, and it is legal. It's also important to note right now that NIL doesn't go through schools. NIL is exterior to schools. Now, that doesn't mean that athletic departments, and we've heard this from multiple people that have been on this show, that Trev is, preparing for a day where it could be brought in. Now that could be 3 or 4 years down the road, and there's no guarantee yet, but at least it's something that you prepare for, because things are changing so fast. It's crazy to me. You talked about, Greg, a year ago, you're talking to players and they weren't bringing it up as much as they do now. And it's like a year ago, it didn't exist yet. And now we're writing the rules kind of as we go along. This is the first spring that we've ever had an NIL company sending out people to go and talk to a recruit before they even come here. And there's nothing wrong with it. It just, I guess you do this professionally. Do you ever just take a moment and sit back and go, what in the heck is going on here? Or like, how do you keep up with everything?
Oh boy, all the time. I think that that's for just for a multitude of reasons. But yeah, it's a lot. And the changes have been swift, and it's of course because it's dealing with the NCAA. It is not always the clearest. What the rules are. The rules are sometimes different state to state. Like it just becomes really difficult. And something that will always stick with me is last summer. I was with the thing with the Warren Academy with former Husker Steve Warren, where they had a guy from Open Doors come in and talk to parents about NIL, right? As it was really ramping up that summer, and people were really starting to just have a lot of questions about it. And it was just murky about how it was going. And you should have seen the parents were so confused about what it was. And that always sticks with me, though, because I'm like, well, if the parents are this confused, what do the athletes think? Right. Like, and so it just always, and so there's always this change. You just have to stay on top of it the best you can. But yeah, the days of old school college football are over. I would be curious to see if they ever do decide to bring NIL in-house where schools can have direct ties to what's happening. I wonder how much that actually would change, just because it's interesting to me that these companies and these collectives that are starting to build up, and it's not just at Nebraska, it's all over the place, right? I saw another one. Alabama announced that they had a collective going today. And if you don't know what a collective is, I mean, no way, right? If you don't know what that is, it's essentially where a group of companies can pool their money together into the collective, and the collective can then disperse those funds on behalf of those other companies. And so it makes it easier to then pitch those prospects, because you don't say, hey, when you come here, you're going to have $100,000 deal from restaurant X. We already have that money in the pot for you. Like, it just kind of cuts that one step out, which makes it a lot easier. But you're just going to continue to see more and more of that as schools really lean into the NIL world.
And when you say state to state too, one of the things that we heard from a friend of ours was he basically, like in Florida, right, I think is one state where obviously, because there's no rules in Florida anyway. I mean, it's just Florida. It doesn't matter what path in life you're on in Florida. There's no rules. I think they can actually endorse a specific collective, right? Like,
that's it. That they can, that they're allowed to do just
that they're allowed. Yeah, they're allowed to endorse like one. And so they say, here's the collective we work with.
That was Tyler. That was Tyler. That
I know. I was trying not to name drop. And then
okay.
And
we've
then,
already named him.
Well, that's true. And then but he said obviously in Nebraska that's not allowed. Right. So that's the state to state part. I was just trying to clarify that for our listeners too, because like some states like that. Now, of course, I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama, you could, say which collective you're working with as well. I would guess that a lot of the SEC schools probably, in state probably could do that. I wouldn't be surprised to see some legislation come through in Nebraska where they're like, I'd go right ahead and do that, but
I'd write it if I could. I mean, if
yeah,
right. Anything
But-
to legally help the program out, I have no problem with.
Well, I'm just glad that Alabama is able to do this because it's good that they can finally catch a break.
Finally
So-
catch
Yeah,
a break down there.
happy for them to be able to land a player or two, right?
Yeah. Because those guys, man, they've been struggling, and
Just
Down on their luck.
I heard last week they had to settle for a 4-star guy.
Yeah, it's too bad. It is too bad for him.
The
But you know
demise
what?
of the program.
It does bring up the point too about, we asked the question, I think when we had Sipple on, I asked him, how would some former Husker coaches do in today's world, in the world of NIL and transfer portal? And I just, it was kind of funny. I threw out Beau and he goes, "Oh, that'd be a disaster." But then, and then he took it back a little bit. But then I asked him Osborne, and he gave kind of the cliche answer, but it was the right answer. The great coaches adapt to whatever the rules of the time are, and they would find a way to make it work. Nick Saban is, if not the greatest of all time, certainly one of, and probably is. And look at what, he will take the rules of today, which were different than 25 years ago when he coached, and he will just be the best coach at NIL, and he'll be the best coach at the transfer portal, right? I mean, that's just the way it is now.
Well, if you think about it, like when there's a few things to give us an example of that with Saban specifically. Remember, he railed against the proliferation of spread offense. And then he adopted the spread offense and won championships. He came out against the transfer portal, and then he's been great. He had an All-American wide receiver last year, Jameson Williams, that he got out of the transfer portal. He did the same thing with NIL, and it was funny because I remember when I saw it on Twitter that he was kind of against NIL and was saying, "Be careful what you wish for." People were saying that's really just a warning shot that, hey, if we're going to be able to do this, we're going to do it better than anybody. So be careful what you wish for. And then lo and behold, we look up and we see that Bryce Young might have a 7-figure NIL deal. Like he definitely lets you know ahead of time. But the great coaches adjust. Like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and the great programs adjust. And it's one of those things in Husker Nation, Redcast Nation, get behind all this stuff. Don't fight it. Is that Nebraska has always been successful, not because of our great population and the mountains and the oceans that are next to us. We're on the forefront, whether it was weight training and strength and conditioning 35 years ago, or the first time having, Husker Vision screens in a stadium, from a technology standpoint. Today it's NIL and it's portal. And those are brand new things. I know just from the last couple of years, but those are the things that if you can be great at that is going to assist your program right now. And so I think it's just really important from a fan base, from obviously the program itself. You mentioned Open Doors, having former Huskers like Adi Kunelik and Blake Lawrence leading that, having Huddle it right downtown. I mean, every advantage you can possibly do. Look at what Oregon's done over the years with Nike. Didn't hurt them, and so you take every advantage you can, especially when you are that state with 2 million people right in the middle of the country. One of the things that's been, we've talked a lot about NIL here. Let's talk a little transfer portal, because that's going to affect one of our last topics here, which is roster management. Where are we at with the roster? And the transfer portal plays a big role going in and out with that. We were talking beforehand. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm not even sure how important it is for me to know right now, but I had 89 players. You thought maybe 88 or 89 on our current roster. Can you kind of give the Redcasters some glimpse of what's the next couple of weeks look like? Where are some target dates of where we need to be at 85, and what's kind of start to lay out the next few months leading up to fall camp?
Yeah, so essentially where we are now with spring ball just ending, you're going to start to have a lot of exit interviews, essentially with players and coaches, right? So most all players will sit down with Scott Frost just to kind of talk about where they are in the program, how their spring went, what the future holds for them. Out of those conversations is when you start to see guys enter the transfer portal. And the reason why I would not worry at all about them being at whether it's 88 or 89 scholarships right now. And I think it's one of the two, including both Xavier Betts still, and I think DeAndre Jackson, the transfer from Texas A&M, who was verbally committed as well. And we'll see if he makes it here later this summer with the running back situation. But you're going to have more than 3 or 4 guys leave the program between now and when fall camp starts. You have to be at the 85 per Big Ten rules in August. And essentially, if you're the Husker fan listening to this, hoping that O'Shawn Mathis joins the program, you need to be at 84 so that you have that scholarship available that would then bring you back to that 85. So you would hope to be at 85, including Mathis, right? I don't see any issue with Nebraska being able to get to that. Like I said, I think that they'll have more departures. And really the way that you know that is because when we talked, the word of spring football was competition, right? The competition, working out the kinks, newness, like those were the words. And because you have so much competition, there are going to be hurt feelings and guys that feel like they should go on to get bigger opportunities or more opportunities at other schools. You also still have kind of the looming thing about that 2021 class where you had so many guys come in that never got a chance to visit Nebraska, that coaches didn't really get to go out and see and evaluate in person during their senior season. So you could have some adjustments there with that class too. And you've already seen a few from that class leave. And so, yeah, I think they'll be totally fine with getting to that 85. And that number is important still, but not nearly as important as it has been in years past.
You know, you have I mentioned earlier the YouTube, the video series. You have a couple of different ones there, and one of the recruiting question of the week, and you had a really good one. I thought March 29th, how to encourage players to leave the program, and it was a question brought into you, and you and Steve Merrick, I think, were the ones responding to that. And one point you said it is okay to cut players today, especially with the transfer portal and all the player movement going on today. But again, that's one of those things that's different from 5 or 10 years ago. But essentially, I mean, that's having to happen now too. I mean, players essentially are, whether they're being persuaded to leave or cut in some cases, that has to almost happen now to get your numbers right.
Yeah, it does. And it's interesting because it still kind of sucks to say, and it feels weird. Like you were saying earlier, it feels weird to talk about the money aspect of it. It feels really weird to talk about a guy basically being encouraged to leave the program. But the thing that I always note that really helps this is that you don't put a kid in as bad of a position anymore when they have to leave, because they don't necessarily have to sit out when they go to another school, right? Because there's so much more freedom of movement for players, and because players are very savvy about that as well now, and they know that they can leave. I just don't think that the same hurt feelings are there as once were. And I think because college football is such a tight-knit community and coaching circles are so tight-knit, you end up in a situation where if a guy leaves a program, as long as it's not under some crazy circumstance, I should put that caveat on there. The coach that he's leaving may even help him find a landing spot. Like you see that as well, because he knows coaches at either a lower level or at another institution that you're not going to play in your upcoming season. It can help you find a landing spot. And that goes vice versa. That goes with, when a player comes in the portal and Nebraska wants to get a guy. I think defensive coordinator Eric Chinander was talking about this. As soon as one of his guys goes in the portal, he's got buddies and coaching that are calling him, and vice versa. For when they have a guy go in, he calls that coach and kind of gets the 411 on him to figure out if that's worth pursuing. So it's just a lot more, it sounds weird, but it's a lot more transactional now. But it also ultimately benefits both sides because you just don't have those same hurt feelings anymore.
So what you're saying is that college sports is becoming more and more like pro sports in that way.
Well, you hear it if you heard those interviews with coaches this spring, right? How many times this spring did Mickey Joseph reference we try to get the NFL mentality, or Travis Fisher say it the same way? Mickey Joseph flat out said that I tell guys that they're playing for roster spots. You just have not really seen guys be that blunt about what's happening in terms of roster management.
Oh yeah, here's a video clip we have of Joseph saying that.
Well, you hate to say this, but this is the way the NCAA's got it right now. With this transfer portal, you got to treat this like free agency. So Casey's no different than Ryan or Deshaun Watson going into the new camp. You're the guy. You're getting here, but you're the guy. This college football landscape has changed. This is considered, with the transfer portal, this is considered, to me, free agency. And, that's the way you got to play the game. If you don't play the game like that, you're not going to catch up to those schools that's already out in front of it.
Greg, that's transfer portal is free agency. Rob, you saying that college is like NFL?
I've been saying it. I've been saying it since the transfer portal started, right? And on the show, probably going back a year maybe since I've been doing the show with you guys, is that I feel like that's how the transfer portal is going to be. You're going to have to start planning your rosters based off of X amount of scholarships for transfer players. There's no way around it. I'm not going to say that like I called it, because I'm sure that these guys were thinking
No,
that
you
long
called
ago.
it. Feel free to say it, Rob.
I mean,
you pat yourself on the back, man.
yeah, I will. But I mean, I was saying it before, and I had that discussion with Dave. I kind of remember the show was on, but we talked about that, and I was just saying it's going to be like free agency, especially with the NIL. I mean, some of these guys are going to be going to schools. They're going to realize I'm way better than this school, right? Like, and I hate to say it like that, but they're going to go, I can go somewhere where I can actually make some money. And that's what they're going to want to do. I mean, I'm not going to say that this young man Mathis is trying to do that, but he'd be silly if he wasn't, right? I mean, if I had an opportunity to take a job that was paying me six figures, from going someplace where they weren't, I'm going to
Rob, and think of it this way too, I'm overstating those fans that don't like all these changes. But if you were one of those people that like it old school, just remember that some of these changes, the lack of regulation within the NCAA allowed this stuff to be created. If you don't like a player leaving to go make more money, then I don't know how you could like the coaches over the last 10 and 15 and 20 years that would leave from one place to the next. I mean, look at Brian Kelly. Guys just leaving leaving their players that they just recruited. I remember when reading about Osborne in '78, the only time he ever interviewed at another school, Colorado, and he would have been offered, I think, double or triple his salary, and he just couldn't do it to his players. He couldn't do it to the guys that he recruited. He couldn't leave them. And then you've seen some of the coaches over the last 10 and 20 years leaving, schools for another school and just making, a gazillion dollars on it, or the coaches that. Like you said, Greg, guys can now leave and at least they have options. You're not, even if you're cutting them, at least you have an option. How about before all this transfer portal, players that if they wanted to transfer, coaches could literally block them from going to certain schools and block them. Really, man, you're taking away a kid's chance and opportunity too. I mean, so some of these things are just a byproduct of all that, but it is what it is now. And again, it's you either be good at what the rules are today, or you're going to lose players and it's going to hurt you in recruiting.
And if you're a fan and you don't like it, if you're an alumni of the school and you don't like it because you feel like we're not making enough of an effort to recruit these players or anything like that, you can probably figure out a way to donate to the school. You could probably figure out a way to donate to one of those collectives if you wanted to,
Sure.
Because at this point now, fans don't have a right to complain when schools aren't getting these players. Put your money where your mouth is. If you're not happy with the way it's happening, put your money where the mouth is, or shut up, because that's what's going to happen. All right. I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. I mean, either put your money where your mouth is or shut up, because this is the way the NCAA is going to be ran from now on.
And it's the way that it's like Mickey Joseph said, it's the way that the elite schools that are those teams that you see in the college football playoff, I guarantee you are doing all of this and more. And so you're going to have, I try to slide that in there.
Alabama.
Yeah. So you're Georgia. So you're just going to have to go ahead and figure out a way to make it work. Like if you want Nebraska to be on that level again, it is not going to happen just by hoping and wishing. They're going to have to play the game the same way that those other schools do.
Yep. How about the last question before 45 minutes. I'm always like, this will be a 25 minute discussion. And then, we're 45 minutes in. And, but I asked you this question on our list earlier, and just kind of give us maybe some of the importance of what Vince Ginta, is it Ginta or Gunta? How do you say his last name? I'm terrible with names.
Man, I say it Gwinta, and I met him and he said it and I forgot. And so I say Gwinta. So we'll see.
Okay.
Apologies if we are all butchering that.
Yeah, I still say Prochaska, and I have to catch myself. It's Prohaska. I'm horrible with names.
Yeah, that one I don't mess up. He's a large man. We don't
you mean like Beatrice, Nebraska?
Yeah, you call it Beatrice. Yeah, you don't want to do
good
that.
luck with that one. Yeah,
right.
Some of the Nebraska towns, Kearney, people say him wrong there. But anyways, the importance of Vince Ginta returning back to Lincoln for recruiting. And obviously, he was here under Callahan. He's gone around. He was at Baylor prior to here. What does it mean to have him back, and what's he doing?
Yeah, it's a huge deal. So his title is the Senior Director of Player Personnel and Recruiting, which is a very fancy way of saying that he runs the entire recruiting department. Like the buck stops with him. He is the guy that is the go between like the recruiting department and the coaching staff / Scott Frost. Like he's the guy there in between there, and he gets to set the vision for what the rest of those guys in the recruiting department do. And the reason that it was a really big deal are a few reasons. One of them, like you mentioned, he was here with Callahan, which if Bill Callahan did nothing else, we know that he was a great recruiter and brought a lot of talent in large part because his recruiting operation was just so organized. Like they are very well known still for having a really buttoned up, well organized attack when it came to recruiting high school players, and they were great at evaluation too, right? Just couldn't coach. So then you get, not at least in college.
Hey man, I'm a Raider fan. I know all about
that. So sorry. So not to bring up one of the Voldemorts of the past. But then Vince goes on and has been around the NFL, has been in some different college spaces as well. Most notably and most recently Baylor, where they've been very good under their new coaching staff with Dave Aranda taking over after Matt Rule down there. And Baylor was also known for having good evaluations, also finding kids down in Texas and then developing guys as well, kind of, being able to find those gems down in Texas. And so bringing him back to then put his vision on what Nebraska needs to do on the recruiting trail was really important. And in talking to him, man, that might have been just last week, which seems like months ago now. He was really impressive, but he also struck a nice vision about how Nebraska needed to kind of start from the inside out when it came to their recruiting. So not just in state, but also that 500-mile radius. I talked to him about recruiting Big Ten footprint because I always find it a little bit weird that Nebraska does not recruit against Big Ten schools enough. So it is great and I think smart to recruit those states that this coaching staff came from: Florida, Georgia, some Alabama, right? Those states down south. But what about the schools or about the states where you have rivals that they play in, right? So why not recruit Minnesota, Illinois? They do recruit Iowa, Wisconsin, and all of those states. You started to see a little bit of an uptick with their recruiting efforts. And Vince also said that was important to them, even though it can be difficult because there are well-established schools in those states already that Nebraska is going to play. So I think there are a lot of reasons he's a really important piece, and they aren't done adding guys to that people to that recruiting department either. They've got a couple of positions that they want to still fill yet.
So Rob, maybe you could take one of those positions. I don't know.
Honestly, I would just be the team manager or water boy at this point, and I'd still pay for my own tuition. Although they would probably give me an NIL deal because of my awesome podcasting skills.
Yeah,
probably.
So,
I'm sure you're great at throwing the guys towels. I feel like
apparently, apparently though, I can't throw the bones correctly. I had like 10 seconds to take a picture in this, and I had my arms like this instead of like this. Okay. And some guy critiqued me on the way that I threw the bones today. And
on Friday we took that tour and we got to sit in the chair, the throne chair that like O'Shawn sat in all the so we got to sit in there, and we're throwing the bones, and we were getting critiqued on that. Husker fans will critique everything. They will critique the way the spring game is played. Was it, okay, how about this? Let's just throw all the recruiting talk away for a second. Just spring game, just what you watched. I mean, do you take much away from it? Was it was a practice to begin with. The first half really wasn't football. And for me, there's no reason to get upset about it. I've seen some fans seem to be upset, but I mean, any takeaways from the game itself?
Oh man, you're getting roasted about your bones. I don't I takeaways from the game. I don't understand why people are getting upset about what they saw in the spring game. Like you had to know coming into it that you knew that Frost was going to be really vanilla in the schemes that they ran. So you just weren't going to see a lot of the new stuff that they've been putting in, and that kind of came true. You also knew that there just wasn't going to be a lot of the scholar. There there were going to be a bunch of scholarship players missing out there. So it was naturally going to look a little disjointed and ugly. And that's what we saw, right? Like, I guess no one really knew because they didn't announce this ahead of time that they were going to be playing two-hand touch in the first half. And that's not good. I liked Ramir Johnson's comment after the game where he said it was trash. So that's good.
That was probably the best post-game interview because all he had to do was walk up, say that was trash, and walk away. And nobody needed to say anything else. So.
Especially for a running back, man. I can't imagine like Yant had to be like really
oh my god. I want to see Yant running some people over. Like and then and they would stop him after like 3 yards. And I'm like, that guy is the literal definition of what is it, like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Like that's that's him. But the cloud at the end of the cloud of dust, he's going to be 15 yards up the field. Like that's how that kid was. I mean, what was he averaging 6.5 or something or whatever yards per carry in that game where then we benched him the second half?
Against Purdue in the first half. Yeah. That's a whole nother story there.
Yeah, we can do a whole nother pod on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, man, you can come on anytime.
Yeah. We'd love to have you back, Greg. Well, as is a tradition on the show, we do parting shots at the end. I'll start with Rob. That we're going to give Greg the final parting shot. So, Rob, what you got?
Well, I don't really have much. I just want to thank the fine people of Nebraska for such a wonderful weekend. Everybody that I run into out there was really, really nice, especially at our tailgate. We had a DJ at our tailgate of all things. Like we go watching up and there's like an actual DJ out there, like bumping music, playing Husker music. And it was just a really good time, really good people. When I say things like, you know what, I love you all, I mean it. Like I can't tell you, I never in my life as a kid growing up would I say, man, some of the best days I've been having as an adult are in the state of Nebraska. Like I would have never thought that as a Northern California kid, but I can sincerely say that now. Like every time that I ever come out to Nebraska, I feel at home. I feel welcome. I feel loved. And thank you all for just kind of making my weekend one of the better weekends. It was that 7-hour drive on the way home went by in about an hour. So it was awesome.
Well, and one thing that maybe could tie you into the recruits there, Rob, is that if you're getting that feeling from people, just the feel and the vibe of what's in Lincoln, that's how important it is, Redcasters, Husker fans, to set that kind of tone for when recruits are here too. And like your point there, Greg, about, the players that come here, and we've heard it forever. Hey, I thought there was a cornfield right outside the airport. That's the importance of getting kids to Nebraska. It really, truly is. And we saw that during the COVID, year and a half off of where we couldn't get those kids here. It is just that important in Lincoln to get kids here so they can really see what it's like. Greg, take us out of here.
Oh man, that stuff I gotta follow that because that was very nice. I don't have much. I just said thank you guys for having me on. Man, you and this Bones, I'm glad you got it better. Like I don't we can't roast you on your own show, man.
Yes, you can. Please do. That's what they do.
We do it
literally.
All the
the one of the biggest monikers of the show is "Shut Up, Rob."
Shut up, Rob. Shut up, Rob.
I'm sorry. I see why. That's fine. That's fine. But no, thank you guys in all sincerity for having me on. Also wanted to give a special shout out to the show that you guys had. Was that last week with the Husk girls with the roundtable that you had? I checked that out. That was really cool. There were a bunch of those ladies that I have interacted with on Twitter, and they definitely know their stuff and like to get after us on Twitter. So shout out to all of them that were on last week.
Yeah, well, Abby right there, that when they pulled up, Abby was one of the 6, and nice. And that's something, I'm glad you brought that up too, Greg, because that's something that we want to kind of build on. And Priscilla Joseph is somebody that, Rob, we ran into her at the end on Saturday there, and she was going to come to the tailgate, but shockingly had thousands of things going on that morning too, and welcome to Nebraska, right? But we've got people like Priscilla we'd love to have on. We've now talked with Mike Babcock. We've talked with Brandon Vogel. Now we've talked with you. We'd love to talk with Aaron Sorensen. Of course, we're on the Hurrdat Network too. And we are huge Hill Varsity supporters, and always go to hillvarsity.com/subscribe. But the other thing, and I've mentioned it a couple times before we end it, I want to keep pushing what you guys are doing on YouTube, and you've got some great video out there talking to all the recruits. You've done the recruiting question of the week. How can somebody send you a question, by the way.
Yeah, you can send them to me on Twitter at Greg Smith HV. Always want to interact with you guys, Husker fans out there. I always say that the vast majority of you guys are great. There are jerks in every fan base. I'm a Lakers fan, so I know about jerky fan bases. But by and large, Husker fans are great. You can send me the questions there, or you can just comment on those YouTube videos directly at Hill Varsity YouTube channel and get after us there. We love to interact with you guys.
How are the Lakers going to do in the playoffs this year?
Oh, God.
Man, all right. So
Man,
you owed me one for that crack about you throwing the bones. I'm
I'm a Warriors fan too.
Oh.
I've been through some lean years, so you can make fun of me all you want.
It's fine. You guys are just now getting used to winning, so it's okay.
Hey, we won a championship in 1974, the year I was born, coincidentally. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, Greg, thank you so much again, and we'll definitely have you on again. But Redcasters, this was a lot of fun here, and hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, that is a Go Big Redcast.
Go Big Red.